Think gadget reviews, news, and all about it.
Oppo N3 review. What the Oppo N3 lacks in style and grace, it makes up for with sheer geeky credibility. The star of the show is the camera. Not only does it have a great 16-megapixel sensor, its lens swivels around on a motorized pivot. Yep, that means it'll take selfies, but that's just the beginning of its motor camera potential. For nerdier phone fans out there who want to try something really different, the Oppo N3 packs an awful lot of tech into its body. But is that worth the extra girth? One thing's for sure, this beast of a phone isn't for everyone. Beauty versus beast. The Oppo N3 was never going to be a normal-looking phone. It's the successor to the Oppo N1, last year's swivel camera oddball. What's new this year? All the specs have been updated, the screen's a bit smaller and now the camera can be operated with the touch screen, rather than just manually. This is not a normal phone, and the Oppo N3 embraces its weirdness. Rather than trying to make its swivelly camera meld into the rest of the frame as much as possible, it features a completely different design. With a fake leather finish rather than the smooth matte plastic used over the rest of the Oppo N3, it's as if the phone has been given a skin transplant from a Galaxy Note 3. There's even fake stitching around its edge for an extra attention-grabbing hit. If an out-there design isn't your bag, it's time to close the case on the Oppo N3. It's probably not for you. Its sheer dimensions are also a bit of an issue. In the last couple of years, phones with gigantic screens have gone from being a joke to the norm, but the Oppo N3 has the large screen of today's phones with a frame of yesteryear. The bezels are that much bigger, the frame that bit fatter, and it results in a mobile that's a real hand stretcher. It may just be a couple of millimeters wider and thicker than an LG G3, but they really matter. This phone doesn't feel all that comfortable to hold. And while the metal band around the middle adds strength, it ensures you don't get an at all smooth feel. Unlike the similarly huge Nexus 6, the Oppo N3 does at least put the frequently used back button within reach of your thumb, although the light-up soft keys are bizarrely, inexplicably dim. Geek points. Thankfully the Oppo N3 isn't just a selection of weird and wonky bits cobbled together. For one, the fingerprint scanner on the back is really quite good. It works well, sits right where your index finger naturally lands when extended, and is its own button. You press it to fire up the Oppo N3's lock screen, after which it automatically scans your finger. As has become the norm for phone fingerprint scanners, you can teach the phone 5 fingerprints. This isn't the end of the phone's neat hardware extras either. In the slide-out SIM tray there's a second slot that can take either another SIM or a microSD card. You can't knock that sort of flexibility. The Oppo N3 also gets you some neat wireless extras. It supports AC-grade Wi-Fi, which gets you super juiced-up Wi-Fi range and power when used with an AC-compatible router. 4G support is primed for the UK too, with all the bands we use here supported. That's an improvement on the Oppo R5. Hollywood screener. These days, of course, a few little hardware extras aren't enough to court the enthusiast crowd. You need a gigantic screen, too. The Oppo N3 has a 5.5-inch IPS LCD screen, which is big but a shade smaller than the go-to geeky favorite the Galaxy Note 4. It has a 5.7-inch display. Resolution isn't quite as good either. The Oppo N3 has a 1080p screen where the big boys of the phone world are starting to use QHD displays. Do you need those extra pixels? For bragging rights maybe, but we're more than happy with the resolution on offer here given this phone costs a fair bit less than the Note 4. Screen freaks take note, though, the LG G3 has a higher res display and costs around the same cash, if not less. The Oppo N3 has a pretty attractive screen, with the natural-looking colors and pure whites we've come to expect from an IPS LCD display. You can tell it doesn't have remotely OLED-like blacks when you take the phone in a room with slightly dimmed lighting, but outdoors you'd be hard-pressed to notice. There is one issue, though, and it comes down to something we've noticed a few times in the Oppo N3. Its software isn't that well optimized. In the display end, this shows up in the auto brightness setting, which seems to be a bit slow to respond, a bit jaggedy in its changes and simply not always on the money. We had to fiddle with the brightness slider manually a few times during testing, and you need to make sure the camera's the right way around as the ambient light sensors on the reverse side of the camera lens. If the screen suddenly goes dim, that's probably why. Color in Android. Who can we blame for the sketchy bits? It seems down to the changes Oppo has made to Android in its custom ColorOS software. This is largely a custom UI, just like the other interfaces you'll find on the phones of almost all the big names. The Oppo N3 uses ColorOS 2.0, and it's not quite the 100% bug-free piece of software you might hope for. We've noticed a few little glitches in our testing, such as the home button suddenly not responding for a while. We've seen similar little buggy bits in the Oppo R5. The software is clearly a few updates away from perfection, so be sure you're ready to be pelted with a few software gremlins if you pick one up sooner rather than later. ColorOS 2.0 style is a bit off the norm too. Rather than having the usual Android arrangement of a bunch of home screens sitting on top of an apps menu where everything on the phone lives, the Oppo N3 just has home screens. You can arrange your apps into folders, but everything on the phone needs to have a spot on these screens. This can make it a bit hard to pretty up your home screens, and the zillions of white app icons that greet you when you first fire up the Oppo N3 can feel like a bit of an assault. However, there are plenty of tweaks you can apply. The Oppo N3 supports themes, and you can download plenty more using the Theme Store app that comes nailed to the phone's lead home screen. They range from the tasteful to the frankly bizarre. There's one where all your icons are replaced by little cat-like monsters, for example. There are also custom gestures on hand that let you open apps with just a quick on-screen doodle. Top of the class of 2014. Thanks to the odd little glitch, the Oppo N3 doesn't feel quite as super slick as it arguably should, but it certainly has enough raw power on tap to get there in the end. It has a Snapdragon 801 quad-core 2.3 GHz CPU, the same used in the HTC One M8, and 2 GB of RAM. This processor is primed for retirement now that the Snapdragon 805 is here and the 64-bit Snapdragon 810 is about to be plugged into 2015 Android Kings, but it'll serve you pretty well into 2016 and beyond. In the Geekbench 3 tool, it earns the Oppo N3 2,797 points. That's around 10% better performance than that of the mid-range Snapdragon 615 used in the Oppo R5. Come mid-2015, the Oppo N3 won't look all that powerful, but as it uses such a popular chip you get the same sort of visual wizardry as last year's flagships. That's not always the case when other lesser-known brands are jammed in. Dead Trigger 2 looks great and runs just about perfectly, for example. Oppo still has some work to do in liquidizing bugs, but if you have the patience to wait for that to happen, we think you'll be pretty happy with the overall performance.